Good afternoon. My name is Claire Bell. I work in the Penn State Outreach and Online Education Marketing Unit, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I wanted to first acknowledge that we have received several questions in advance that we will cover either in the discussion or during the Q&A. Please feel free to also add any questions live into the chat, and we will do our best to answer as many of them as we can, time permitting. Today's topic is about names. Our names are an incredibly important part of our identity. Everyone has a name. They carry deep personal, cultural, familial, and historical connections. They also give us a sense of who we are, the communities in which we belong, and our place in the world. For so many Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, otherwise AAPI, mispronunciation and misidentification are all too familiar. These acts can be rooted in bias, whether we are aware of it or not. Seemingly innocent remarks about people's names, culture, and upbringing can make this group feel like outsiders. But with some understanding and some intentionality on all of our parts, we can prevent this feeling of being viewed as the other or a perpetual foreigner and create a greater sense of belonging for the AAPI community. As part of this year's Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, I am so excited to be joined by this amazing panel of guests today to discuss this very important topic. Last year, Procter Gamble released their inspirational new film, The Name, aiming to spark conversations about this very issue. Today's panelists include two members of an all-AAPI team at P&G who created this film. Unfortunately, another panelist who was scheduled to join us today has fallen ill and could not be here today. Please join me in welcoming our panelists from P&G. Would each of you please provide a brief introduction of your name, title, and role for us?
So, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'll go first. I'm Janet Long, and first off, thank you for having me here today. Senior Brand Director on Global VIX is my day job, which means I lead the brand equity, design, innovation work for this beloved brand. But my other job, and also very important, is being the project lead of The Name last year and this year. I am based in Cincinnati, Ohio, but I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, as a first-generation Chinese American, which is why this work and community is very important to me. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ya-Yun Chow. I'm Senior Brand Director at Procter Gamble, and for my day job, I'm an advertising specialist on Pampers and Secret Deodorant. For my side job, as Janet mentioned, I'm the creative lead on this APA campaign and P&G's APA efforts in North America, which is particularly personal and meaningful to me because I'm born and raised in Malaysia, but came to the States for college and stayed, and I'm a naturalized American, and I'm a mom of two boys. So it is personally meaningful and important that we do this work.
Welcome, and thank you both for being here with us today. In addition, we have another special guest joining us from Penn State Human Resources, where she serves as a DEIB expert and an advocate for the AAPI community. Would you also provide a brief introduction of your name, title, and role?
Thank you, Clarabelle. I'm so excited to be here with this panel. My name is Nalini Krishnankuti, and I'm the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Program Manager in Penn State Human Resources. I also serve as a council member on State College Borough Council, and I'm a founding member of a local community group, the Panelists Circle, which we founded in 2021 to elevate the voices of Asian Pacific Islander Desi American community, stand up to anti-APIDA hate, and celebrate APIDA joy. Now, in all these roles, my work is aimed at all of us understanding different dimensions of diversity, work towards consciously including each other, and to create a sense of belonging. My name Nalini means lotus. It's a very aspirational name. It's similar to a water lily, but both the leaves and flowers, unlike the water lily, they raise way above the water. It's a very important flower and symbol in Asian cultures. It grows in turbid waters and still rises above the mud in all its beauty, undisturbed and unaffected by the surroundings. And so it's a reminder for each of us to have this ability to be really true to ourselves and rise to our fullest potential, irrespective of what our surroundings are. And since Kamala Harris became our vice president, I'd like always to mention that my name means the same as hers. It means lotus.
Thank you all for joining us today. And Nalini, this is for you. I wore my lotus flower pattern shirt today, so we have that as part of the background for today. So let's get started with the conversation. I know we have a lot to cover, so I definitely want to make sure we get started. So P&G as a company has always recognized that their people and their brands can make a significant impact on the community. Their commitment to a force for growth and a force for good is all about doing the right thing. Janet, Yayun, you all have day jobs at P&G, and this was a special project in addition to what you do day to day. Can you start by telling us how you got involved in the name project, your role, and why you felt this work mattered?
So I'll go first. Thanks for asking, Clarabelle. Actually, how it started for me dates back to actually the Atlanta spa shootings back in March 2021. After witnessing the level of increased Asian hate crimes in light of COVID, it felt for me personally, it was the last drop in the bucket. And growing up in New York, despite the diversity that exists in that city, I did grow up and face a fair amount of racism and discrimination. But up until then, I've always just dealt with it because unfortunately, it was just kind of the way of growing up in New York. But after all this, I felt really distraught. And I asked myself, like, I didn't know what I could do where I sat in the skill sets that I had. And, I just didn't know how to support the community. But I felt at that time, no action wasn't an option anymore. And thankfully in October 2021, I was asked to join this campaign team. I was able to connect with my partner in good, Yayun, and I had the honor to really lead this work for P&G and lead this project team. And it was honestly a beautiful union between like purpose and skill set. And it's kind of cool to be like, oh, this is what I do for a living, but also I can use it for good now. And, and this works to your second question, like this work matters because we matter. It was important not to only show up for this community, but that, hey, we see you, we understand you, but also to really leverage I would say the superpower of the P&G training, I'd say, to open the hearts and minds of those who are not API, right? So we actually spent a fair amount of time obsessively focusing on finding a universally relevant insight that names matter, which we can all relate to. And that for APIs, belonging starts with a name.
So Janet, you didn't know each other, right, before this project, correct?
Not at all. Yeah, it's a big company, so it's hard. You don't really cross paths as much. But yeah, we're like almost like best friends now.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yes, she's the kindred spirit.
Same.
Yes. So for me, it really, of course, throughout my life, particularly moving to the United States, going to school in the Midwest, there's been moments when I faced outright racism and discrimination, but I've kind of put up with it. And the tipping point was in 2020 with the rise of Asian hate. I felt like, similar to Janet, I couldn't, doing nothing is no longer an option. And really in my day job as an advertising specialist, what I do for P&G is crafting advertising that changes hearts and minds in favor of our brands. Consider the superpower from my experience at P&G. I knew that it's just a no-brainer to leverage this expertise and P&G's platform to change hearts and minds in favor of AAPIs, to make a difference for AAPIs. So I raised my hand and went to Mark Pritchett, our Chief Brand Officer, and said, hey, I can help you with this. and asked that we assemble the right team. And at that point in time, we pulled in Janet, and it was serendipity that we have the absolute A team working on this effort.
So why do you think it's important for companies such as Procter & Gamble in this case to create this kind of work and engage in these types of efforts? I mean, certainly the superpower of P&G plus the skill sets of P&G's employees and superstar marketers like yourselves, how does all of that come together and take that expertise and put it out there? Why do you think that's important for companies to be doing?
Janet?
For P&G, it really lines up with the company purpose and strategy on force for growth, force for good. And like those two things are intrinsically linked, right? The work, first of all, it's a continuation of a lot of the efforts and campaigns across the board for all different groups. So for the top for Black Americans, Can't Cancel Pride for LGBTQ plus community, etc. So it's an ongoing and on-standing program for P&G, first of all. And then why it's really important specifically is also we have to show up and support the very consumer groups that we serve with our products. So just like touching and improving everyday lives, this is just something intertwined with our company purpose and continuing to elevate and just improve the means for our the consumers that we serve.
It has to be very consistent with a company's purpose. It can't be a one-off effort. So for P&G, it's a perfect fit. As Jenna mentioned, our company purpose is touching lives, improving life now and for generations to come. And that is for every consumer in every market that we serve. So it is very much in keeping and consistent with P&G's purpose, and it's simply a logical, intuitive next chapter in the work that we've been doing already in the D&I space. Many folks may have heard of P&G's The Talk. That's aimed at supporting African American consumers. So this is simply one of the chapters of P&G's efforts in the D&I space.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at the film now?
Youngju. You are perfect.
Youngju.
But I know it won't always feel like that. I know that some days your name will make you feel different. Like you don't belong. Like they don't want to get to know you. But I promise there will be those who try.
Hey, Youngju. You wanna listen to music? Sure. Thanks.
The MVP award goes to Yeyoung-jo. Yeyoung-jo?
It's actually Youngju.
Youngju. Thank you very much. Youngju.
You remember what Youngju means? It means strong and resilient. Because I know you will be.
What a beautiful name. Can you teach me how to say it?
Wow, this was such a moving and impactful film. And I love how you tied it to that life-changing moment that everyone can relate to when your baby's born and you decide on the name. Can you tell me what insights you learned from this research on this project and what you were hoping to achieve with the film?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd say the API community is one of the most complex and diverse groups to begin with. Cultures, languages, whether you have a first generation experience versus an immigrant experience, all of those make it quite hard to find a universal insight that would resonate with the whole community fully. So when the agency team took a step back to reflect on the challenge that we put forth for them, they identified names to be one of those universal challenges for this community. Typically because our names are hard to pronounce because of the unfamiliarity and the fact that it's not anglicized, which is what this community, like this country, is very familiar with. And then we realize is the chronic mispronunciation of our names signal that we don't belong. Just a simple act like that just feels like, it's just your identity and you just don't belong here. And that's why when we think about the flip side, with that being the challenge, a simple act yet so powerful thing is just to learn how to pronounce names, right? And invite someone to that conversation, not make it intimidating or daunting. And each of those individual simple interactions, we believe, would make a meaningful impact for the community as a whole.
Yes. Strategically, when we started this initiative, we had to take a step back and understand why is it that APIs were facing so much hate? And why is it that we were facing a rise in hate crimes? And it all boils down to one thing at its core, which is that by and large, AAPIs are regarded as other, as foreigners, as people who don't belong here. And that's why a symptom of that is the fact that most APIs, the most commonly experienced insult that APIs hear is go back to fill in the blank. Go back to China. Go back to wherever you're from. Despite the fact that I'm not from China, despite the fact that we're not all from China or we're not all East Asian, that's the enemy that we were addressing. The feeling that the perception that APIs don't belong in this country, that we are other. To do that, we knew that we had to unlock empathy, because empathy leaves no room for hate. Once you relate, once we see each other as human beings, it is hard to hate. It is easy when we're regarded as other. So understanding that strategic premise, we had to uncover an insight that was, we call that insight framework true and truer, which is we had to unlock and uncover an insight that was true for everyone, that opens the door to relatability for everyone who is not AAPI, but helps them walk a mile in our shoes. And that's where the truer component of the insight comes into place, which is why the premise of choosing a baby's name at birth is so crucial. That is the true component. Every parent can relate to that moment and that gravity of that decision and the consequence of nailing it or messing up your kid's future for the rest of their lives, right? Then consider what they could be called on the playground if you give them a name that lends itself to name calling or bullying. So every parent understands that that's a universal truth, and that unlocks the path to empathy for AAPIs, because for AAPIs, what's at stake is even greater, because not only do we have to consider all the ramifications of a name for a baby, we've got to consider the trade-offs of, do we hang on to our heritage, or do we take the path of least resistance and choose an anglicized name for our babies, and essentially walk away from a part of our identity?
Right. And I was just thinking, in my personal experience being the first generation Chinese American, my parents chose to give me more of an anglicized name, even though it's very unique. But at the same time, I have my Chinese name as my middle name, as does my sister. And in Chinese, the naming is 3 characters typically, starting with your last name. And then the next 2 characters are usually a combined meaning for your first name. And one of those characters is typically something that is the same character used within that family. So my sister and I share the same character, but the other character is different. So that way, it is very well thought through, and the meaning certainly has a lot of connection to what they aspire for their children. So I know for us, that's something that as the generations continue, being born and raised here, I know we've continued and we've done the same for my kids. They have their Chinese name as a middle name. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are in terms of how that's being brought up in the insights about that dynamic of when do we consider maybe a more anglicized name, or can we stay within our identity, and how important that is as part of our given name. I know there's been times where people have made that choice when they move here. Yayun, I was just thinking about you in particular. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Yeah, I was telling Clarabelle that when I moved here, I literally just gotten off the plane, driving to campus, and in the car, I was telling my friend that, hey, I want to change my name. I want to, instead of Yayun, what a weird name, what an uncommon name, what a hard to pronounce name. I want to change it to Chris. Imagine. And it was my friend who talked sense into me, and she's a fellow Malaysian, and she said, no, you need to be proud of who you are. Your name is your identity. And I thought about it and came to the moment of realization that she's right. Ultimately, it's a personal choice. It's a very personal choice. Regardless of the choice, we want everyone to feel like they belong. And if that personal choice is to hold true to a traditional name, in my case, a name that's based in Mandarin, Zhou Yayun. Yayun is my first name in American terms, means elegant melody. It's really important to be true to, for me personally, to be true to my name and to hang on to it, because it's a tangible reminder of my roots. It's been generations since my family fled the persecution in China. We are an ethnic minority, even in China. So it's the last vestige of our roots. And the story's been passed down where I know that my dad's agonized for months in choosing my name. Yayun means elegant melody. And my dad, it's quite cerebral. He's a teacher and he passed away last year. So it's even more important for me to hang on to that last connection to my dad. It was important for him to choose a name that was befitting of my parents' hopes and dreams for me. I want to hang on to that. It is important, it is personal, and it's meaningful.
Nalini, I know that you have a bit of a story with your name as well, being more of a very strong matriarchal connection versus kind of the perception of a very patriarchal culture. Can you kind of talk a little bit about your name?
Sure. My name. So I come from this community in South India, which is very matriarchal, and we take the last names of our mothers actually. But I grew up in Mumbai, which is a very patriarchal society. So when my parents began to, submit, when I started going to school, when they were writing my name down, it was Pachu Beta Nalini. My father had a different name, and I was more connected to my mother. And the patriarchal society had no room for that. And so it was like, where's your last name? Where's your surname? And that makes it like really difficult. And so my parents, I actually lost that matriarchal name. It used to be Pachu Vital Krishnan Kuti Nalini, PK Nalini, which then got changed to Nalini Krishnan Kuti. But it's my dad's name, and that's my name. It's been my name for, all these years. But there is a loss at the root of it because one system couldn't accommodate the tradition, right? So I'm really cognizant of what we do with names and how we change what people do when they come to the United States. So, for example, if there are communities in Indonesia that have only one name, they don't have the concept of last name, right? And imagine right from whether they want a social media account or they want to have a passport, how difficult it must be because you have to talk about that, the last name. And so I think APIDA communities are impacted very differently, whether you're first generation immigrant or fourth or fifth generation Americans. I think there's a big impact. But I remembered something, Clarabelle. You asked me, and you were talking about the impact of this film in particular, and what Yayun mentioned about empathy. And what I want to tell you is, I didn't grow up here, so I came to the United States at the age of 21 to go to grad school, and so I had 2 decades of my first name and my last name being pronounced correctly, 2 decades of not being underrepresented, 2 decades of building cultural confidence, correct? But where I really connected with this film was when the child is getting onto the bus and the mother is watching, because that's me watching my daughter get onto the bus. And we had given her a name, which I think is beautiful. I mean, her name is Mahima. It means divine grace or power. And I think it's a beautiful name. But being in a county where you're underrepresented, Center County, in Pennsylvania, you also by then have got experiences of what people can do to that name. And even well meaning adults like teachers can create harm by how they interact with that name. So I really, really connected with that moment of the mother watching the child go onto the bus. And also with that idea of, there are people who'll do good things and really try to learn your name, because I've come across those people, and also those who create a lot of harm. And especially I think it's really important for teachers. I mean, they can do so many things, even before the beginning of school year, reach out to parents and get to know how to pronounce children's names, or go around the whole classroom and ask kids to pronounce their own names, right? Like, there's so many ways we can make it welcoming. So I want to actually thank you both for this film that really makes us all connect in a very deep way to the humanity of people. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I was thinking as you were talking how, you all have spoken about how this project, tied to you personally. Janet, I was just thinking, you had, while your name is anglicized, your experience though, walking home from school one day because you look different. I mean, the name isn't the only solution sometimes, in terms of whether you're viewed as a foreigner or an other. Janet, I thought maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing what experience you had as a child.
Yeah, so my birth name is Janet, so I did grow up with that as growing up. But for this film, I related to Youngju in every vignette where she's experienced othering. So and I fully relate being the minority in many situations, right? So that bus scene, I really related to walking down and going through the seats, holding onto your book bag, not knowing where to sit, and not feeling like anyone was welcoming. I definitely related to that as I was growing up. And so the story I want to share is one day when I was a teenager, I was walking home from school and a group of 10 girls approached me. At that point, I didn't really think much of it. There's always like a lot of students sometimes. But until one of the girls just walked up to me, she looked at me and she was like, "Can I?" and asked for the time. And unknowing, innocently, I just like grabbed my phone to tell her the time, and then she quickly headlocked me, started beating me, while the rest of the girls laughed and giggled, and then a couple of them threw punches as well. And thankfully, it was a short beating before they all ran away. But I remember that moment so clearly. Sorry, still an emotional thing. Um, Shakingly walking home, calling my mom, telling her what happened while sobbing, and just like so many thoughts raced through my mind. Like, why me? You know, did I just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time? Did I look like a good target and weak? Was it because I was walking alone? Or was it because I was Asian? And, it's funny, I tell this story. It's not my first time, but I still cry about it. And I share this because the pain of being othered can really range from small microaggressions to violence, as I've experienced. And it usually escalates. It usually starts with something small and it turns to something big. And why I find this film not only relatable but important is like I just really hope this doesn't happen to anyone else out there. And a step towards more belonging and less hate, even as small as learning how to pronounce someone's name so they can feel more welcome, and bridging the connection so you have more empathy, just opens us all to a level of connection that's more human. And hopefully, we get to a place where we don't have that tension. Do I have to name my child something that's easy to pronounce, that they can fit in more? Or, and make that sacrifice of my identity and my heritage. Like, I hope that the world where you don't have to even think about that, because we normalize different names. We normalize different pronunciations. We normalize the conversation of asking how to pronounce someone's name, That would be beautiful. So, yeah, this hits on a very deep level.
And so while sometimes people may think, oh, well, it's kind of a basic, thing to just, try to pronounce someone's name, why is that a big deal? Like there certainly could be a lot more that can be done, but how does this simple gesture of pronouncing someone's name correctly create belonging? And how does one go about doing this?
It is the concept of escalating microaggressions that we're trying to address. While a simple gesture, it forms a foundation and normalizes, creates the base understanding that all names belong, that all names are of equal value and importance, not just an anglicized name. How often have we been in meetings or been in settings where someone may say, I'm going to butcher this name, and then goes ahead and butchers the name anyway? It's just a signal of inconsideration. It is a signal that, oh, it doesn't really matter. When a better approach could be as simple as, tell me about your name. Teach me how to say it. Help me to pronounce your name. And in fact, instead of approaching it as something that's foreign or scary, it could be a gateway into getting to know someone at a deeper, more personal, more human level. Just a conversation starter of tell me about your name. Now we've learned, in this conversation alone, we've learned so much about Nalini. We've learned about Janet, myself, and it's names are a doorway to get to know someone at a deeper level. That's particularly true of AAPIs. So that's how we see the role of and the importance of learning someone's name. It's the same principle as law enforcement dealing with the broken window rule. Yeah, tackling something as small, seemingly small, as going after perpetrators who can throw rocks or bricks into windows, but that prevents, when you tackle something at a root level, at a foundational level, it prevents the escalation.
Right. And it sounded like, Yayun, the simple gesture of even being willing to learn, I don't think the expectation is that everyone has to pronounce, your name perfectly right out of the gate. And sometimes it takes some time to hear it over and over again. So I know people have wondered, well, what if I still can't pronounce it, even though I ask somebody, can kind of be awkward sometimes. But I think the simple question shows your intent to understand, even if you can't, perfect it right out of the gate, which is, I think, just as good. And it really creates that feeling of belonging and learning about the person, genuinely being interested. The other question that we tend to hear is, what happens when we observe somebody else making that mistake? What do you do as a bystander in that situation?
I was just thinking, like, we all learn to say difficult names and words all the time. Actually, we do. Like, it's not that, our vocabulary of there are many words even in the English language that are hard to pronounce, and when we want to, we do. So I was thinking, it's like when we, I don't know, when we are a bystander and somebody else does that, I mean, I think we can, correct with grace, like kind of be gracious about their intent, maybe, but we're really kind of saying, we're being charitable about intent, but we're addressing the impact on the person, right? Like, we're just kind of giving that chance, because I think when you mispronounce, we're slowly making people feel invisible. And then, a friend who was a famous professor was on stage in a panel and was actually just skipped because the person who was announcing was so afraid of mispronouncing. And she then just stood up and announced, herself, hey, you missed me. I mean, she was famous enough in her field that she could do that. But I think when we do not even take the time to learn someone's name, can you imagine what we are actually saying? How are we going to remember this person when there's time for promotion? How are we going to remember them when there's what are we saying about this person? Are we saying we don't plan to communicate with them again? There's a game that I sometimes play on Zoom, if I'm especially in a room full of, I'm the only people whose names are more anglicized and I'm the only one with a non-anglicized name, I actually will say, okay, let's see, especially when people play the game where you call on someone, and I'm very sure then I'm the last person to be called. And I think it's because people are maybe afraid how to spell that name. And I think if we are hosts, we can do another thing. We can go around and eliminate that by actually even playing a conscious inclusion strategy. If there's 10 people, we go around and say, can everybody not say their, what job or title, but say your name and tell us a little story about your name. At the end of 5 minutes, you've actually created a community because we all begin to see each other differently. So I think there are many ways. I mean, I think it's really important to stand up to correct the name. It depends. Sometimes you cannot do it right away. You might have to wait for, it depends on the situation. But I think it's important to stand up, and correct as an ally as gently as possible so that we're building bridges.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do think that it's about intention and how much importance we assign to a name. If we can learn to say Tchaikovsky, Dostoevsky, Gotha. Surely we can say Nalini, Lakshmi, Yayut. It's about intention and how much importance and how much effort we're willing to put in. And it does go a long way. And it could be as simple as help me, tell me how to say it, teach me how to say it, tell me about your name, or simply going around the room and having individuals introduce themselves.
Yeah, and I also want to share, by all means, I wasn't this name perfect pronouncing person, with all this work, right? Like I was in the shoes of super feeling uncomfortable to not say it correctly and then hesitating and holding back. And after all this work, it's just like, be a good role model, be that person in every interaction when there's like a new name or unfamiliar. And sometimes even anglicized names have different pronunciations, Kristen or Christine. And it's somehow the minute that you take this on as a mind, like a habit, almost a practice, and you role model it, then you start noticing, like my teams, I started noticing would start, adopting this as well. And anytime we would just take a moment and learn how to pronounce names. And I remember there was one that I really struggled with, and it was Aditya. So it's spelled as Aditya, but there's like that nice TH in there. And I struggled so much that I called my friend who was also an Indian American, and I said, "Can you please record yourself and how to pronounce Aditya?" He did, and I practiced like 20 times or 30 times. And this guy Aditya usually goes by Adi because he's just like, no one can do it. So everyone else calls him Adi, but I'm like Aditya, and he just lit up. And I'm not to say, go, it's just those little things make such a difference, to be seen, to be valued. And I just also want to say, like, none of us are perfect. It's a journey for all of us. All it takes is take that first step, and then you start building a muscle. Then other people will start seeing it, and it's like a ripple effect.
Yeah, and actually, it made me think about, even though my name is anglicized, I cannot tell you how many times it's been mispronounced while growing up. And I remember that every time someone would actually pronounce my name properly, I would always just be so happy about that, which seems so, seems so strange, right? That I would have to have those rare instances where someone pronounces my name properly. But I've heard so many different variations of it, and it's just nice when someone does pronounce it properly. So I totally can see why this resonates across all names. It's not just specific to AAPI, but certainly we're talking about this as that kind of platform into better understanding. And so, in this digital world that we're in now, I know one person had pre-submitted a question about, when someone's off camera and the name is unfamiliar to you, how do you even address that person, especially if you don't really know the pronoun to use either? What's maybe a good way to think about that?
I think you're on mute. Yeah.
For me, good practice in that situation actually is, it's best if we can all have our pronouns and in our names whenever possible, but not everybody wants to do that. So a good gateway is, for even when we introduce ourselves, is to say our names and say, I use the pronouns, certain pronouns. But if you don't know the pronouns of somebody, even if the camera's on, we might not know what somebody's pronouns are, right? So a good practice is, when you don't know it, to have conversations where you don't have to use pronouns. You use people's names, you use their titles, we can easily, especially if it's one-on-one, we can have conversations where we don't have to use pronouns. That's how I would answer, that particular question that someone had.
Yep. And in the context of Teams, which P&G uses, if someone's off camera and you want to make sure that you're getting their name right, what we usually do is on chat, we'll say, hi, would you mind introducing yourselves? We want to make sure that get your name right. So aside ping on chat, that usually helps. And the beauty with technology today too, And it's something I've started doing is in my email signature, I include the pronunciation. There's tools out there that's also incorporated into P&G's website. It's pg.com/name. It's integrated with a widget called Name Coach, where folks can record how their name is pronounced and embed that in their email signatures. Yeah, so just the beauty of digital enables many, many tools that can help in various situations.
Yeah, those are great tips. And Nalini, I think you had spoken about, sometimes passing over someone and just not saying the name at all. We've been specifically focusing on correct pronunciation so far, but what's even worse is if people avoid pronouncing a name altogether. And so what implications does that have if you actually try to avoid even pronouncing a name? That seems difficult. Like we talk about asking and learning more about the person's name as a mechanism in which to help us learn their name. But what if, if you ever experience someone that just doesn't call your name or mention your name at all? I'm thinking like if there are students on this call today, if there are staff or people who've graduated through Penn State, if those names aren't pronounced correctly, or if you're in a meeting and you don't get called on at all, what are some of the possible implications of not even pronouncing someone's name?
So for me, with the APIDA community in specific, I think that's common experience, and it's also there's invisibility for the APIDA community in many, many different aspects, right? Like even sometimes we are talking about race dynamics, and there are issues that our communities are facing, and it's not even in the picture. And it's about expanding, right? Like expanding and bringing everybody that's having, like, for example, there were times when anti-Asian hate was at its peak. And I was on the Governor's Commission for Asian Pacific American Affairs, and we had to actually advocate for this, like be a voice for the community, begin to. So it's an invisibility in names for sure, but also in every place where we are talking about equity. I think all of us have to be voices for everyone. We have to be voices to include. Like, it's really good to ask this question, who's not included, right? So if we say, even if we say APIDA, a lot of times people then think it's, people from origins in China and Japan and Korea and India or Filipino and Vietnamese. And then you begin to say, no, actually this community is very, 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 very diverse, right? So that invisibly, that question you asked, I think it's an experience that a lot of people have in their names being passed over, but sometimes we also have experiences of our whole group being passed over, like the whole community. And we are not one monolith either. We are just, so I don't know, I've taken it down a different path, but I do think invisibility at an individual level as well as a collective level are both very harmful. And no matter who we are, in our identity spectrum, we all need to kind of stand up for everyone.
Great. And, Yayun, you mentioned some tools that are available in this great, technology world that we have that can really help with the pronunciation of names. Are there other immediate actions that we in the Penn State community, including all of us who are on the webinar today, that we can take to really try to improve that feeling of belonging?
I firmly believe that it takes two, right? It's a two-way street. And for AAPIs, a tool or a tip that you could consider, that's something I do when I introduce myself. I use mnemonics. I'll say it's Yayun and the E is silent. So pretend that the E is not there, Yayun. So that helps. Some other folks have try other mnemonics. So mnemonics could help. And if you are not AAPI, it's great to simply ask, tell me how to say your name again, even if it's a second or third time. Tell me how to say your name. And that's great. Don't ever be afraid of that. We welcome it. To be honest, I welcome it.
Someone actually asked if it's respectful to ask someone to repeat their name slowly to make sure that we catch it correctly. Is that being respectful?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely okay. And the other thing, so there are things we can do as individuals. And I think, we all, like my name is Nalini Krishnan Kuti, and I've had all kinds of experiences. I've had a person who was staffing a hotel in North Carolina spend all day trying to pronounce my name right so that when I arrived, he could say it right. I've had people who don't try at all, right? But when I get a chance as I've grown older, I've used this opportunity to also just tell people when you see a very long name of South Asian origin in specific, there's no need to get afraid. Put it 2 letters at a time, consonant and vowel, right? So na, li, ni. And Krishnan Kuti is a little different from that model, but my husband's last name, for example, is Tirupati Kumara, which sounds, it's very long, but 2 letters at a time is just Tirupati Kumara. So if you just don't get afraid, don't freeze, and just give the person dignity and say, I'm going to try this name. Please help me, right? Like you can go about it in so many different ways, or could you try it once? And it's all about the dignity of the person and your intent to use that name again. So I think that, and then I think as institutions, for example, at Penn State or in a high school, we all know that at graduation, you're going to use all these names. So if we institutionalize it, I mean, can you imagine a very important point in time of a child's life and the name is just massacred and people expect it to happen? I heard a student once shared a story where a high school teacher was interchanging 2 kids of Apida origin all the time on this team. So at the last day when they were giving out gifts, they intentionally, when the teacher called one kid, the other kid went, and they did it, and the person didn't even catch it. But do you know what that does to people? The kids all knew, but the teacher didn't. And so I think it's really, we can not only do things at a local level, I mean at a personal level, but we can do institutional stuff. Like I would actually make it standard practice for teachers in schools, especially in elementary age, to reach out to parents, find out the name ahead of time. And in places like graduation, the technology can help. You just ask everybody to submit, right? Like, but you need to have the will to do it, and then the actions can follow.
Yeah, if I can just build, just reflecting on my personal experience, even though I have a anglicized first name, my last name is Luong. And it's so important in education and academia, it's like especially for kids at a young age to set the right expectation, to set their, to imagine being a kid that comes into school and their name's pronounced correctly in elementary school. That sets the foundation expectation and empowers a child as they go to junior high, high school, and college to also be like, this is how you pronounce it. Because at the very beginning of their stage, they already experienced that. We call it the right moment of truth, right? So I think especially for this audience and group, you guys have so much influence on changing the trajectory for that person. And I'll also further say, especially in universities, before these students graduate and enter the real world or, the workforce, establishing again the expectation so that no matter where they go, they carry that forward back to that point in time in graduation or freshman year, how their professor took the time to really put the effort. It's not always going to be right, but it's really effort and intent to get it right. That sets their foundation when they go and become a leader at different organizations to also then create that ongoing positive ripple effect. So just don't want to undermine the power that everyone that's attending this forum right now that you have to really influence a ton of people.
Absolutely. That is a lasting impression for every child. And I have friends who are grown adults now who talk about the moment of graduation and having their name mispronounced at graduation. That that left a lasting scar for that individual. And similarly, all of you have a hugely crucial role to ensure that every child, every student has a positive experience that then paves the way for them to role model that in their professional lives as they enter the workforce. And they too can make a lasting impact on someone else. Even for very senior folks at P&G, our chief brand officer, whom I dearly love, Mark Pritchard, he even asked, how do I pronounce this name? And so what we do is we'll record the pronunciation so that he can easily refer to it and learn to say names. If a Fortune 50 chief brand officer can ask and does not feel bad about asking and can take the time and effort to make the effort to learn, surely everyone else can too.
So we got a great comment from the audience, which is the first thing that's taught in any Dale Carnegie sales course. It's a quote: "Names are the sweetest and most important sound in any language." So I just wanted to mention that. So thank you to the person who posted that.
And names
someone
are
also
the first gifts the babies receive from their parents.
Exactly.
Consider that for a moment. It's just brings to life how important they are.
Also, someone asked if we could just clarify what AAPI means for those who do not know, and I believe maybe DEIB as well. Just maybe we've been using some acronyms.
Sure. Let me start with DEIB, which is easier. So DEIB is very commonly used at Penn State, and there are different variations elsewhere. But D stands for diversity, which is the different traits we all have. E for equity, which is giving people the resources they need to succeed. And I for inclusion, where we actually take the act to include each other. And the result of D, E, and I is belonging, which is the feeling you get. So DEIB, do DEI well, and then you get belonging. And maybe I'll take the APIDA question also. So just looking at, the history of Asians in the United States, actually the first Asian settlement, a lot of people don't know, which is why maybe we should mention this here, but the first Asian settlement was supposed to have been established by Filipino fishermen in Louisiana as early as 1763. And since then, we've had a history, of ups and downs, different groups coming, being left out of the country, right? Like not being allowed to come from 1920s to 1965. But it was during the civil rights movement that the term Asian American itself was first coined, and it was done by students, two Berkeley students, who actually realized the political force that was necessary. Like we can all come together under an umbrella, and the term Asian American was created. The first Asian American studies courses came around that time. But when with that, a lot of people thought, or it felt like that group was mostly East Asian and Southeast Asian, even if maybe the intent to exclude was not there, but a lot of South Asians didn't see themselves reflected. So in recent times, the Asian American became Asian Pacific Islander, Asian American Pacific Islander. So you might have seen API or AAPI. But in order to get South Asians to see themselves reflected, the term APIDA was invented. So Asian Pacific Islander Desi American. Some people like the term and some don't. Desi is a word which comes from India. It means of the country. So that's an attempt. I'm sure the word might evolve even in the future, but currently that's a term that's being embraced more and more by many communities. Just because at the time of 9/11, Southeast Asians and East Asians stood in solidarity with South Asians who were being targeted. And right now, with anti-Asian hate, we see East Asians and Southeast Asians being targeted, and it's time, the South Asians are standing in solidarity. So that just gives us that umbrella. And I also like to say there are no Asians in Asia. It's a completely American phenomenon. In Asia, you have Chinese and Korean and Japanese and Sri Lankans and Indians and Pakistanis, right? So this is something for us to embrace, to unify, to come together, to do good.
Not only, I believe you also used the word DESI, is that right? Am I pronouncing that correctly? Yeah, could you talk about what that means?
Yeah, so the word D in APIDA is Desi. It's a little slightly different way you pronounce it. So it's Asia, APIDA is APIDA. So it's Asian, Pacific, Islander, Desi, American. And the D stands for South Asians, or Desi literally in Hindi means of the country. So origin is from India, and the attempt is to include the South Asian subcontinent, Pakistan, people with origin in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, India, Sri Lanka, that region.
Great, thank you so much. I have another question before we kind of get into the Q&A section. So studies show that the AAPI community can oftentimes be viewed as that perpetual foreigner. We've kind of talked about that, but also sometimes they're overlooked because they're viewed as a model minority, or they oftentimes face the bamboo ceiling in their careers. There are very few AAPI represented in the C-suite. And so it's become common for AAPI to accommodate and assume a more westernized or anglicized name. And so some people wonder if it's too much of a disadvantage to maintain their given name despite its importance to their identity. So what are your thoughts on those trends? Maybe you can talk a little bit about, we've talked a lot about the perpetual foreigner, but maybe if either one of you want to talk about model minority or bamboo ceiling.
I can start, and I'll speak specifically to model minority. It's really falsely portrays that the beliefs that APIs are the model and they don't face the issues and challenges that many other minority groups face. It basically covers up the fact that there's still a fair amount of APIs that's really significant that suffer from poverty. It actually covers up the fact that they're going back to this massive umbrella Asian American group and Pacific. It's significant where each of us have a different tapestry of experiences. So, for example, Pacific Islander group, Native Hawaiian groups, I think they're working on acronyms for that too. But like these are all different groups in this massive umbrella that's trying to cover it all. And when there's like, oh, everything's going great, it's a model minority, you cover up the problems and challenges, and it mutes the voices of the overall group. So that's the key issue and challenge with this model minority myth.
I completely agree, Janet, and I wanted to, just add to that. We are actually the APIDA group is the racial group with the largest disparity in income, because you have recent immigrants who so it's an issue in universities too. A lot of times you'll find, for example, when you just have that monolith idea, then sometimes Asian APIDA students are not maybe eligible for some scholarships. And while it's true that, there are some groups that might be doing well, and then maybe fourth, fifth generation, or maybe, so APIDA community, you find people working in very high skill jobs, but also working in very low skill jobs. In both areas, we have a large percentage of people from, of Asian origin. API origin. And so because of that, when you take this kind of monolith idea and model minority idea, a lot of times students don't get the help they need. There are even, there's a 14% of undocumented people in the United States are of Asian origin. And so, I mean, so there could be a lot of students who need help. And if you do not disaggregate the data, we will be missing them. You could have recent Bhutanese immigrants who look the same way as maybe somebody who's, come here to grad school to study engineering and is having a great career, right? Like, so you really need to begin to look at the data differently.
Yeah, that's the key. We need to disaggregate the data and just not look at averages across the entire group and treat it as a monolith, because we're not. A large proportion of the Asian American immigrants to the United States are in blue collar jobs, the dishwasher and kitchens, the busboy, and so on. So it's only through disaggregating the data and looking at the different groups within that carry the label Asian American, are we then able to really penetrate and understand the true reality.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate all of your willingness to share your personal experiences and your expertise. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over now to the Q&A portion. We've been receiving many comments as well as some questions. So let me start going with some of the questions that were pre-submitted during the registration process. One audience member asked, I have heard it said that State College is a great place to live and raise a family if you look like everyone else and if your name reflects the commonality of the ethnic traditions of the majority of residents in the area. How has your name affected how others interact with you, even before they see you?
Should I be answering it because I'm from State College?
Yeah, I think that would be good. And I can also share my thoughts on that as well.
I can just briefly say, it's not just State College, it's everywhere. There's an actor, right? Carl Penn. Everybody knows Carl Penn. His real name is Kalpan, first name, Kalpan, and he was not getting any auditions till he took his first name, divided it up into two, and made it Kal, last name Penn. So I rest my case. I do not know what people were thinking about, but if they had not gotten to know me much earlier because of my name being a barrier, should I say, was it a loss for them or me? I'm just kidding. But Clarabelle.
Usually the reaction I get is, people are usually shocked after they see me because when they first see my name, they think, and sometimes even when they hear my voice, and I don't know why this would be, but they think I'm Southern or they think I'm from the South. And then when they see me, they're like, oh, wait, that's not like matching up for me, with what I thought. So, that's what I got used to growing up. And, within State College, I don't really experience too much, I guess, where I'm treated differently in that regard. But in the surrounding areas, I am a little bit more conscious, I think, of that when I venture outside of State College. So I think that's more in the surrounding, counties. And that's just something that, I feel like there's more people staring at me at that point, than what I would experience here.
Yeah. And Clarabelle, I was being flippant too, but I do think, we are about 6% of the population in Center County. So I do think there are, not being flippant, I think there are real consequences. Sometimes the implicit bias of, of not belonging, I think you can be overlooked for things where that could have come earlier. The ideas, the bias against, what are the traits the whole group has it just right from, we know what the bamboo ceiling, the kind of leadership traits, or even carrying the stereotypes of everybody that looked like us that came before us. We are not always given that, the luxury of being in the individuals we are, because each of us is an individual. And, sometimes people don't take the time to discover the individuals we are. So that's a real cost. I was just being very flippant there.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question. We have a couple more rolling in. So this one was also another pre-submitted one. Someone asked, they mentioned that they've assisted Penn State APITA Caucus in hosting the first ever APITA Festival. And they wanted to learn more about what additional steps the borough can take to establish a greater sense of belonging in this community. Maybe Nalini, you could address that.
The borough has two offices now. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion director for the very first time. We also have a community engagement office. And with the PETA Festival, I was involved in it both as a person from the council, but also as a PANA-PETA circle, helping the students. And what we found is once the students were connected to the engagement office, the council, the support was amazing. So I think what we can do is some of these things the borough can also begin to do proactively, reaching out not just to the APITA community necessarily, but to all other groups that are, I think we can do more in proactively reaching out and making it easy for all these town gown collections. It was amazing for the Penn State APITA students to have this festival in the Martin Luther King Plaza, right? It was like they belonged to this town and we all came together. And to get that feeling, I think we can do more in just making sure everybody, all residents know how to approach the borough, how to do this and reach people we're not reaching right now. Maybe people who don't speak English as well. There are points where we can do better.
Great. Someone mentioned, they find it helpful to have someone's name written out. Is it disrespectful to ask them to write out their name?
Not at all. I love that. That's actually a great way because many of us are visual learners and it does help. But for me personally as well, it helps to see something written out. So I often do that when I'm introducing myself. That's a great idea.
Well, keeping track of time here, we have about 2 minutes left. Another person asked, beyond things like the name campaign, what else do you think companies can do to foster belonging with their brands?
I can cover that a bit. And this is a lot of the work that P&G that we're driving, especially in light of multicultural advertising. We need to figure out a way to disproportionately win with these consumers. And there's the things that we drive is representation, making sure, there's a lot of amazing shows and content out there with all different networks, but a lot of what people see more than anything is advertising. So having someone that looks like me in front of you is already giving you the sense that, oh, this is an American. It's not just Asian Americans we are simply American, right? So representation is very important. Finding the right insights to make sure you develop the right relevance, showing up in places that have the right resonance. Those are there's a lot of things that specifically for P&G from a natural fit with what we do. And then for companies to really continue to invest in their ERGs, so employee resource groups, especially from APA, all other group standpoint, and having that representation across all levels and functions within the company is another thing. Because when you're that person, as you felt with all our stories, you feel the experience, and therefore you're able to translate that to no matter what you work on. So getting more representation, even within a company, is very important.
Thank you. So Janet, Yayun, and Nalini, I want to thank all of you for joining us and sharing your amazing work, your personal stories, and expertise with us today. And many thanks to WPSU for live streaming this event. And thank you to Penn State Outreach and Online Education's Office of Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity, and to the Penn State Office of Educational Equity for sponsoring today's event. For everyone who registered for this event, you will be receiving an email within a week with a link to a blog post where you can find today's recording, as well as a list of resources available. Thank you all for joining us and have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.